Welcome to the Contract Management course. I'm Lucy Bassli, and I'm a commercial transactions lawyer who specializes in legal operations and efficiencies. My company, in a law group, helps corporate law departments to become more efficient and effective in how they handle contracts on behalf of their corporation. This course is designed for in-house counsel lawyers. In this course, you will learn how to think about the contracting life cycle holistically and be able to break it down into parts, considering the process steps that all contracts go through, how to resource them effectively, the role technology plays, how we can utilize data, and how to best resource contract review and contract negotiation that you perform for your company. So with that, let's take a look at how we're going to tackle the contracting problem. First, I want to start by saying that contracting seems to be a problem for every corporate law department. Every company that I've spoken with, usually we start in a very broad context. Comments like, too many contracts, not enough time. The business is frustrated with us. They seem to blame everything on the legal department. They think we're too slow. They call us the black hole. And lots of other, maybe less flattering comments as well. The reality is contracts are the lifeline of every company. Without contracts, business can't be done. Money can't be made, and money can't be spent. Well, it can, but it shouldn't. But in reality, we all know that without contracts, business just doesn't move forward. Unfortunately, contracts are often perceived as some sort of a necessary evil. They are a step that must be taken and not one that most business people look forward to. But we all know that the legal department ends up taking the brunt of that work. We overfunction, we step in to overcorrect, we fix parts of the contract that really we shouldn't be even looking at. The business should be handling those. All of these are concepts that we're going to take into account as we talk through how you can approach the contracting problem that you're facing in a way that helps you move forward more efficiently and really focus on the highest value work that you should be performing rather than drowning in a volume of contracts that go on and on. So how do we start? We have to really prepare before we're jumping into solving the problem. You have to take stock of what's happening today. Really take a look and understand where these contracts are flowing, who's doing them, who's touching them, what kind of contracts does the company deal with on a regular basis. Set the right tone within your own department and with your business counterparts so that they understand that it's time to take a look at contracts holistically and that everybody's in this together. This isn't just a problem for the law department to solve. I also want you to remember that there's often an urgency to jump towards technology to solve this problem. There's a feeling that with the right contract management system, things will get better. There is a role for technology to play, and we will get to that for sure. That is a key topic for us, but it's one that I'm going to save till the end on purpose. There's a lot that we need to do before we jump to technology. It's very important also for you to understand the stakeholders. As I said before, legal feels that it needs to overfunction. Sometimes it just does without feeling it's doing it or knowing it's doing it. But we can't look away from a bad contract. It's very simple. A contract lands on your desk and you feel like you have to clean it up. You have to take a look. You can't just let it go in the state that you saw it. That's normal, but it's not optimal. So what we want to do is move towards optimizing that. But who besides legal should be a part of this conversation? Who besides legal should be in these discussions about improving the contracting process? Who will be impacted? Who will feel downstream effects of changes that you might want to make after reviewing this course? And most importantly, be sure to define the scope. Which contracts really should you tackle? I suggest starting with a finite approach. Pick a particular type of contract. Pick one that you know is a pain point. Pick one that you have really good clarity around how it flows, who's touching it, and who should be touching it, and the impact it has, of course, on the company. But it's very important to not approach contracting as a general problem to be solved, and it's critical to be focused on what is the one type or few types of contract that you want to tackle when you're really thinking about holistically revising how you're going to approach this particular contracting problem. So let's get started. The first step to tackling the contracting problem that every company deals with is for the law department to spend some time defining its own policies. The policy that it has about which contracts it should be spending time on and which contracts it really shouldn't be spending time on. But first, let's take a minute to look at the chevron of steps that are involved in a typical contracting life cycle. We'll start from the left and work our way through to the right, and then we can understand where the policy plays a critical role. There's often a request for a contract, and there's some functions that you'll see below that I've listed here. There's intake, triage, routing. We'll get into more details later about all these different steps, but it's important to familiarize yourself as we go along. Then there's creating the contract, actually pulling together the clauses, drafting, or using a template. Negotiating is key. That is the core of what law departments spend their time on, and we spend a lot of time on this. I spent about 13 years in-house when I was at Microsoft, and I was a commercial transaction lawyer that's lived inside of contracts. And reviewing these contracts takes a lot of time. We have to research other relevant or related contracts, and of course the editing. The good old track changes function that we love so much in our trusty Microsoft Word application, for those of you who mostly use Microsoft Word still. And let's be honest, most lawyers are still living in Microsoft Word, and we negotiate using that document going back and forth via email over and over again. Then there's an approval step. Sometimes there's steps outside of legal that need to be taken to get approval. Sometimes it's also done within legal, but somebody has got to receive it, take a look at it, and have the authority to approve a contract. Then there's a very tactical step, of course, of execution, and that just means signing. But as we know, chasing down a signature can be a very, very long, time-consuming and tedious process. I hope most of you are shifting towards electronic signature, and that's a topic for a whole other day, but it is a critical one, and it is one that really every corporate law department, regardless of size, should be transitioning to if they haven't gotten there yet. Storing a contract, super important. This is, of course, where it all begins. We like to find the contracts we did. We like to find old contracts we can take a look at. And most law departments even struggle finding their contracts. That's the first place. We love to be able to also extract data from inside those contracts, key terms, key data points, timelines, deadlines, obligations. But then that gets us, of course, into managing contracts. So post-execution, who's managing all those terms and who's managing the life cycle of the contract itself. Expirations, renewals, renegotiations, all of that stuff that has to happen after the contract's been signed and living somewhere, hopefully not in somebody's desk drawers. But let's go back to why the legal review policy is so important. If the law department can't answer what they should be reviewing, and the law department is simply reviewing everything that lands on its desk, there is no way to get control of the contracting process that way. You have to take the time to understand the history and understand why these contracts are even being reviewed by the legal department. What's the role of the business in contracting? Do they just get to send over any and every contract to legal knowing that legal is going to review it no matter what it is, no matter the value of the contract, no matter the content or the purpose of the agreement? You have to really understand the whole process and the flow of these contracts and realize that legal plays a critical role in a few steps, but not all of them. And legal should remove itself from a lot of these steps that I just described and really focus on the most valuable parts, which of course we all know the most valuable areas for the legal department are in the creation and the negotiation of the contract, and that's where we spend most of our time. So how do you define the right policy? Well, a couple of things come into play here that are important to make it personalized in a way for your company, for your law department. You have to consider the industry that you're in and what role contracts play. There are some industries that are very contract heavy. And by contract heavy, I mean volume, meaning there's just a lot of contracting that has to happen for the company to make money. One example I'll refer to probably repeatedly throughout this course, one I'm very familiar with, is of course in the technology space. In the technology industry, there are a lot of software as a service solutions out there. I know that you've bought some of them. You probably helped negotiate some of them for your company. Certainly, IT procurement is in the business of buying software as a service. Well, software as a service, if you're the company providing it, that's a lot of contracts that go through the company, because oftentimes the price point may not be in the multi-million dollars. And so to make the kind of revenue that these SaaS companies are making, they have to have a high volume of contracts. So it's a very contract heavy company or industry. And that means, of course, it's a contract heavy law department. On the opposite end of the spectrum, let's think about maybe the oil and gas industry. In oil and gas, there are very large, multi-year, decade-long types of contracts that really don't come along that often. There aren't that many of them that are negotiated from scratch. Certainly there are issues that come up through them, and there are modifications or changes that need legal advice and legal support, but it's not the volume of the contract as much as it's the complexity. So the role legal plays will be very different in a software technology company versus perhaps a more traditional oil and gas company. Also, you have to consider, what are the priorities of commercial contracting to the company? What types are really flowing through the company? And which ones are the most critical for the company to do its business? I mean, in some ways, every contract is critical because it has a purpose. But we all know there are ways to prioritize contracts, and we do that all the time in our inbox when we get a contract. So how do you categorize these contracts based on the impact they have? Is it the revenue you have to look at? Is it the outcomes? Is it the goals that the business sets? All of these are considerations that you have to go through and prioritize for yourself to understand that you're not just dealing with every contract that lands on your desk anymore. You're going to deal with particular contracts in a particular way, and that's the only way to tackle this. So how do you actually define the policy itself? What is a legal review policy? Well, again, the answer that we are trying to come up with is to this question: what should legal review? Or which contracts should come to the legal department? There are a couple of key aspects to answering that question, and I'm going to just break it down into two thresholds that you have to come to terms with as a starting point. You have to come up with some context of value, some number, some threshold of either cost to the company or revenue that you say, no matter what this contract is about, this number is significant enough that legal always wants to take a look at it. Or, on the converse, you can say, no matter what this contract is about, if it is of this amount, this low, this small, this insignificant to the company, legal does not want to play a role in it. And these are tough questions to answer, but this is all part of the exercise. And this is where you're going to want involvement from people outside the legal department. You're going to want business stakeholder input as well. The next key threshold is risk-based. I'll break it down into kind of three things to consider on when you're thinking about what is the risk-based part of your policy. And by risk-based, I truly mean, what are the things that are most important to your company? What are the risks that the company just can't tolerate? And notice I keep saying company and not law department, because the definition of risk is a joint process. It's not just the law department that often finds itself in the shoes of risk mitigation. Risk mitigation, risk tolerance, risk thresholds should be set together with the business in mind. So I look at three different things when I'm trying to consider risk. And in my mind, these are kind of like levers. Imagine you're pulling different levers. You pull some up, you pull some down, you put some into the middle, and you find a place where you're comfortable. Industry-focused risks. You have to understand the industry you're in to know the size, quantity, scale, the value of these different risks. Obviously industry-focused, and there's no one right answer to this. This is really just making sure that whatever policy you come up with fits into the industry and kind of reflects what's happening in the industry. If you're negotiating with somebody in your same industry and they hardly bring legal in, or vice versa, they bring the lawyer in at every step, that there has to be some mirroring, right? There has to be some commonality in how the industry perceives contracting and how legal functions in these contract negotiations of that particular industry. Next, we'll do legal risks. These are kind of the common areas of the contract that really, legal is often playing a part. Data protection, intellectual property rights. You're going to be surprised to not hear me include limits of liability or indemnification, because those are kind of, joint risks that I wouldn't just say legal. Yes, legal plays a key role in negotiating those terms because they're complex terms written in a complex way, which sometimes is the problem that lawyers have created for ourselves, but that's another topic. But by legal risks, I mean truly complex legal principles that require legal involvement in topics that can really become a core negotiation where that legal experience, legal expertise is absolutely necessary. And then finally, I like to consider PR risks, public relations. Sometimes there are deals that really need kind of that extra eye that the law department can provide because the risk is too great of something getting into the news. Something that the business, the company really just doesn't want to see out there, regardless of the topic of the contract, meaning regardless of, the negotiation, regardless of the value of the agreement. It really is just something truly sensitive. And once you've reviewed all of these concepts, once you've landed on something that you're comfortable with and you're ready to put pen to paper or put your words on the screen and type it up, something you're going to share with the rest of the business that they've bought in on as well, please remember to draft in plain language. I can't recall how many times I see a policy that an internal legal team is proud to share with me, because this is such a big step to assuming smart risks and letting go and letting the business feel empowered and move quickly without legal. And then we take a look at the policy, and it is written like probably one of the most complex contracts I've ever read. It has, notwithstanding the foregoing, those kind of terms that I love to make fun of because it's just unnecessary complexity. The other thing I've seen is they're very long. And guess what? The business is not going to spend time reading lengthy internal drafted policies. So please use bullet points, use outline format, and use very plain language. The purpose of this policy is in fact to speed up the business. The purpose is not to slow down, and the purpose is not to create scholars out of everyone who reads the policy. It is really a guide to tell the business, come to legal for these kind of contracts, or hey, go ahead without legal. These contracts you can do on your own, which is probably music to their ears. So let's make it pleasant music. So in sum, I would say, what makes a great policy? It is simple to read. It's simple to understand. It is relevant to the industry. It's relevant to what's happening in the market. But most importantly, it contemplates smart risks, smart calculated risks that are worth taking for the purpose of increasing the business. After all, we're in-house to support the business. Now, one last note on policy. It has to be operational. We've gone through the steps of thinking through what needs to be inside the policy and how it needs to be written. But you have to make sure that you don't write a policy that is operationally prohibitive. What is operations? It's the how. Once you tell people they have to come to legal, you're going to have to consider how they get to legal. What's the best way? What other systems maybe are in the way? What systems are hurdles or steps that the business has to take in order to get to legal? There's just things to consider that are more holistic when it comes to the policy in order to make sure it's truly operational. Making sure that processes are integrated. If you make a reference to another process, like the RFP process in your policy, make sure you understand what that means and understand the impact of referencing that in your policy. Also, very important to consider creating some operational documents that are going to go with the policy. how-to guides, and we'll get to empowerment guides and playbooks later on in the course. But again, when I say operationalizing a policy, I mean how. How are people going to comply with this? That's the question you should be asking when you're drafting a policy.